Let's turn tonight to the book of Exodus, chapter 1. We're going to begin reading in verse 8. I'm going to read there just a few verses. Kind of get our mind around a certain individual that we've talked about countless times because the Bible says so much about him. He's of great value for us as we begin to study the Scriptures. He teaches us so many lessons and leads us to so many places, especially the fact that he led us to Christ. It was through the lawgiver Moses that God fulfilled the promise that was made to Abraham to produce a family, a nation. That nation was in existence until the Savior was born in that lineage, and later on tasted of death for us, went to the cruel cross of Calvary, resurrected, the church was established in Acts chapter 2. But we're going to begin reading in verse 8 of Exodus chapter 1. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar and brick and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. In Moses' life, and we're going to continue to read as we go through, but in Moses' life, we can certainly see the example of God's providence. We say the word providence, and we oftentimes say, well, what exactly does that mean? That means that God has made provision, or he has provided. There's a realm through which God works that is spiritual. It comes through his word. But also there is a way in a realm that God works in the lives of men and women that has to do with the providence of God. We can't necessarily identify the providence of God, and we certainly need to be cautious and exercise great caution when we talk about it, but the Bible does reveal certain characters throughout the history of the book that God preserved them through his providence to do great works. Moses was just one such individual. And if we go through, we can begin to see the hand of God in Moses' life. It's seen in Moses, it's seen in Joseph, it's seen in Mary and Joseph, it's seen in the Apostle Paul. There are many Bible characters where we see God's providential hand and doors opening through the avenue of providence. God's presence is there. His hand is visible in their lives. In fact, Joseph himself talked about how that God had preserved him and brought him into Egypt prior to Moses so that Israel might be saved. Moses was just such a character that God's hand was in the life of Moses. We can see it. We see it first of all in Moses' youth. As we read on, going down to verse 15 of Exodus chapter 1, And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Sapphira, and the name of the other was Pua. And he said, when you do the office of the Hebrew women, midwife of the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. Now we read on in chapter 2. And there was a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a godly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, Because I drew him out of the water. So here we see God's hand in the protection of Moses, in that he protected the youth of Israel, but not just the youth of Israel, but also he protected the youth of Israel, including Moses, from the wrath of Pharaoh. God's hand is once again involved in this action when we see that Pharaoh's daughter called Moses' own mother without knowing it to be his nurse. And so his early years were spent being nurtured by his own mother. Think about the value of that. How important it was that Moses, in the time when he was most formative in life, that he had his own faithful mother to nurture him. Think about the things that she was able to teach him. There is nothing that guides more than the influence of the home in the early years. Our society has changed, and it's not necessarily for the better, because we now have households that require 2 incomes for us simply to survive. That's not a good thing. That's not something that we need to be proud of. It's something sometimes that's necessary. But oftentimes in the process of providing 2 incomes, the children that are at home are left to be tended to by somebody other than their parents. Now, if you've got somebody good in control that can care for your children, you're in good shape. But what if you don't? What if it happens to be that we allow television to raise our children? TV today is not the same television that you and I watched when we were kids. Tom and Jerry have long since left the scenes, and so has Bugs Bunny, and so has the Road Runner, and Wile E. Coyote, and all those different individuals. They're gone. It's a different set of characters today that our children are entertained by. And included in that entertainment are all the pitfalls that have come to haunt our society. There are 2 daddies in households, or 2 mothers in households, and 2 men living together, 2 women living together. And these things are taught as being okay. It's considered to be natural, and so it influences our children in a negative way. It might be that television is not entertaining our kids at all, but it could be very well so, and probably a matter of fact is in most cases, that our cell phones are the entertainment that our kids find today. Do you know what can be found on a cell phone? There's no holds barred. There's no limits, because all that thing is just a little bitty computer, and it's a lot better computer than the laptop that you use at work every day, or the laptop that you might use at home every day and you surf the internet. It'll pick things up that your laptop simply cannot do, because it's such a complicated and sensitive piece of equipment. You can get a signal on it when you can't get a signal anywhere else on the planet. Godly homes are challenged by these things. And so it behooves us to be more responsible minded where our children are concerned, because the lessons that our children learn while they are young are the most valuable lessons they'll ever have in life. You remember this morning we talked about the lost sheep, and we talked about the lost coin, and we talked about the prodigal son. The prodigal son left home having learned many valuable lessons in life that he soon forgot and cast aside, and took his inheritance and did what with it? He wasted it on riotous living. But you know what? The lessons he had learned in his father's house stuck with him. Now, it wasn't until he was laying flat on his back and he began to be in want that his mind went back to his father's house, but he knew what was there. And he knew what he had done, and he knew he had wasted, he knew he had squandered, and he knew he needed to repent of his sin. Where did he learn those lessons? It wasn't in the faraway country. It wasn't in that land of sin. The land of sin didn't teach him about righteousness. What did it teach him? It taught him about sin. The land of sin that we live in will teach our children about sin. What we want to do is instill in them the sense of righteousness and learn the values of righteousness that come from God's book. And that begins in the home. That's where we have to make our start. Moses' mother had a profound influence on him when it mattered the very most. And those lessons, those principles that he was taught, stuck with him lifelong. Outside influence, he also had that. His training came from the house of Egypt, the house of Pharaoh. And it was there that Moses was taught a different kind of lesson. He was taught how to be an heir to the throne, which means he was taught in all the leadership qualities that the Egyptian pharaohs possessed. These were admirable qualities when it comes to being leaders, even if they use them corruptly. It still is a fact that good leaders learn valuable lessons. Leaders make decisions that are important to make based on wise choices. Now, we haven't had that in our country in a long time because foolishness has taken over in our land of politics and ridiculous ideas, extremes both on the left and extremes on the right. I'm just as afraid of an extreme on the right as I am an extreme on the left. I want us to be centered. I want us to find that place where that balance beam, if we stand on it, it doesn't go up and down. I want it to stay exactly where it should be. We want to come full circle. We want to be center of the scale. We don't have that. Hopefully, maybe we might yet. But if we don't find that somewhere in our country, we're going to pay the ultimate price with our future and the future of our children and the future of our grandchildren. Moses learned some valuable lessons. He was trained to lead. He was trained in the ways of the Egyptians. But yet at the same time, the godly things his mother had instilled in him gave a preservation of his loyalty to God's people. So it was a valuable time. Life lessons that he learned from his mother endured the most. We read on in Exodus chapter 2 and we go down to verse 11. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together. And he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou hast killed the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. The Hebrew writer tells us in Hebrews chapter 11 that when Moses was come to years, when he was a full 40 years of age, when Moses was come to years, he made this choice. He chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So here he's made his choice. He's made his stand. Was it the right choice that he killed this Egyptian? Well, certainly not. Taking a life is not right. But soon after he flees, where does he go? He goes to the land of Midian. Exodus chapter 2, verses 16 through 22. And there we find in verse 16, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. So when they come, it says, to rule their father, he said, How is it that you are come so soon today? And they said, An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and also drew water enough for us and watered the flock. And he said unto his daughters, And where is he? Why is it that ye have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man. He gave Moses the 4 of his daughters. And she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. Here we see Moses in God's hand once again. Jethro has taken him in as his son-in-law, and that would be the same as a son. And here Moses learned another great and valuable lesson. He learned now the values of serving. And he had time while he was tending those flocks alone. Time alone is a good thing for us to have on occasion where we can clear our minds and think. We can reflect over things that we've learned. We can reflect over mistakes we've made. We can reflect over choices we need to make. We can reflect over decisions that we need to make. We can set our path and set our course if we begin to ponder and reason over our lives, if we couple our reasoning with things of God. There's no doubt in my mind that as Moses was there tending his flock, his mind had to go back to those times in Egypt when he spent time with his mother. There's no doubt in my mind that his mind had to go back to those valuable lessons she had taught him in the ways of righteousness according to God's command while he sat at her feet, while she nursed him at her bosom. Moses had time to ponder, to reflect. And it was here that Moses began to see a sight. He saw the bush that burned. And the time is right for Moses to be lifted up because Pharaoh has died, and the people are now crying out for deliverance. Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 through 25, and it came to pass in process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of their bondage. And they cried, and their cry came unto God by reason of their bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. So now once again we're going to see God's providence work. We're going to see this man Moses that has left the household of Egypt after being there for 40 years and has now been with his father-in-law Jethro for 40 years tending his flock. He is going to be called upon by God to become a special servant of God. He's going to be that man that's going to deliver Israel out of Egyptian bondage, a bondage they had been in for 430 years as a people. Let's read on in chapter 3. Now, Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Draw not nigh hither. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt. And I have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land and large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites, and Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come unto me, and I've also seen their oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now, therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses, being the man that he was, is reluctant. The Bible tells us later on that Moses was a very meek and humble man. But all this time, providence has made him ready. The different things he has experienced in life have prepared him for the work that he's about to do. He's learned how to lead. He's learned how to serve. Now these two things, after 80 years, need to be put in motion. He spent all this time making preparation. The time is right. It's right, we might say, for the picking. And God calls upon this man Moses to deliver his people from Egyptian bondage. But Moses is reluctant. He said, Who am I that you send me? I'm of slow speech. You know, we oftentimes, and I've seen the lessons prepared, I've found outlines with it on. I've even preached one myself about the excuses of Moses. But I believe in Moses' mind, he really thought he had a valid reason. I don't think he was trying to make an excuse because he said he had a slow tongue. In other words, it was hard for him to speak in front of people. And God didn't accept that excuse. Instead, God said, I'll give you Aaron to be your voice. God simply told him to go. When God gives us instruction to get something done, you and I need to figure out how to get the job done. Now, he's not going to speak to me and he's not going to speak to you out of a burning bush, but he is going to speak through his word. And when we hear his word and we hear the things that God calls upon us to do and we have the ability to do them, you best believe we better get them done. Because we are without excuse. God's not going to impose upon us to do those things that we have no capability of doing. That would be unfair. That would be unjust. But you and I both, all of us, recognize our talents. We know what we're capable of doing. And you say, well, I don't know my talent. Yes, you do. You use them every day. You use them every day to enrich your regular life. You use them every day to provide yourself with a source of revenue and income because you use your talents to do your job to the best of your ability. You use your talents every day to guide and direct your children. You use your talents every day to be friends with folks and have an influence and make a difference with them. We use our talents. We just need to learn that in addition to using our talents for our own glory, our primary concern needs to be, number one, that we use our talents first for the glory of God. We are without excuse. There is no reason for you and I not to take the abilities that we have and use them to do the things that God sends us forth to do. So Moses yields. And what does he do? He delivers Israel with a mighty hand. But his power is not his power at all. His power is God's power that God entrusted Moses with, and it's through the working of Moses that God's power is revealed. Think about the nation of Israel. I've mentioned this many times before. At that particular time, that was the greatest nation on earth. There was not a mightier nation than the nation of Egypt. And yet God sends this shepherd, Moses, to deliver his people from the hand of Pharaoh. In every plague that came upon the Egyptians, God demonstrated his power over the powers of every god of the Egyptians. And finally, Pharaoh relented and let the people go. Our power, our influence, our talents, they're not our own. I remember when Jesus stood before Pontius Pilate and Pilate told him he had power to set him free. And Jesus said, you could have no power at all except it be given thee by God. Our power that we think we have is only a power perceived. It's something we've got on loan from God through the individual talents that you and I all possess. For some, there's 5 talents. For some, there's 2. For some, there's 1. We're given according to our several ability, is what Jesus said about those individuals with those talents, which means we're given that which we can use. We're only given what we can use, but we're only responsible for what we're given. There is not an excuse or a reason that you and I cannot take the talents that we have and use them to the glory of God. And the beautiful thing is that when we do this, guess what's going to happen? God is going to give the increase. God increases everything that we do, sometimes 30-fold, sometimes 60-fold, sometimes 100-fold. But God is able to take me. God is able to take you and do great things. As we use the things that God has entrusted in our care to his glory. All Moses had to do was simply show up and obey God's command. Paul said in Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20, I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me, gave himself for me. Think about Paul. Paul previously was what? He was a blasphemer. Paul previously was what? He was a persecutor of Christians. Paul previously was what? Paul previously was a bounty hunter. He set out to bring Christians who tried to escape the wrath of the Jewish nation. He set out and followed them wherever they went, seeking to gather them up and bring them back so they would have to suffer for their actions. And yet, Paul said, I'm crucified with Christ. Paul said, Christ liveth in me. I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Moses and the children of Israel set out from Egypt. Pharaoh relented, changed his mind. Pharaoh and his army pursued them and pushed them all the way to the Red Sea. But Moses gave them protection. How? He gave them God's protection. And it was Moses who lifted up his hands and parted the waters of the Red Sea so that the children of Israel could walk across on dry land as the Egyptians pursued. It was God who slowed down their progress and made the wheels of their chariots heavy so that the children of Israel would have time to go across. And when they got across on the other side, the Egyptians decided to pursue them and they were drowned in the sea. One of my favorite verses is found at that account in that record in the book of Exodus when it says, and the children of Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. God delivered them. He gave them guidance through Moses. He guided them with a cloud by day because it was hot during the day in the desert. He gave them a fire by night because it's cold in the desert by night, though that they might be able to see. God provided them with guidance. Moses was the hand of God, giving them the direction that they needed. And Moses ended up being, here's the part I love the most, a man of great confidence. A man who was reluctant to go, who said he was of slow speech, slow tongue, now has great confidence. He fled Egypt in great fear, and yet Moses returns with what? With great boldness. He comes back. What happened? What changed? Well, he was led by a mighty hand. Moses was able to see God. He saw the bush which burned, it was not consumed. That fire that is within us that comes from God is eternal, and it never burns out. If we'll just simply allow that fire to guide us, and we'll allow it to lead us, if we'll allow it to take control of our actions, we'll let ourselves go and we'll be everything that God needs us to be. This bush that burned but was not consumed produced a fire within, and it would not dwindle. And it stirred him within as he continued to move forward. It's interesting, the prophet Jeremiah says it's not so with the candle of the wicked. In fact, or not Jeremiah, but Job. Job said in Job 21 and verse 16, lo, their good is not in their hand. The counsel of the wicked is far from me. How oft is the candle of the wicked put out? And how oft cometh their destruction upon them? God distributed his sorrows in his anger. They are stubble before the wind and as chaff that the storm carrieth away. Job 21 verses 16 through 18. God's hand is the hand of strength. Our hands might be weak. Our feet and hands might be feeble, but God's hand is the hand of strength. God's feet are the feet that are swift. They're filled with assurance and confidence, and they're filled with the ability to endure. Jesus said, he that endureth to the end, the same shall be saved. And so he covered Moses in the cleft of the rock over with his hand, and allowed Moses to see him as he passed by. He saw the afterglow, the hindermost parts. Exodus chapter 33, verses 12 through 23. And it was Moses who led and disciplined Israel. And it's Moses, the Bible says, who through faith kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians are saying to do, were drowned. Hebrews 11, verses 28 and 29. And perhaps one of the greatest things that Moses did before his journey was done was he prepared it. He prepared a man named Joshua to lead in his place. Oftentimes we do work, but we don't make any preparation. You know what causes that many times? Because we believe that we need to do it all ourselves. I can remember thinking that way. I can remember thinking that everything that was done, I needed to have a hand in it. I needed to be a part of it. I needed to be sure it got done. But somewhere along the way, we have to learn how to train and teach others to step up in our place. And somewhere along the way, we have to learn and allow others to step up and do things. Are they going to be slow at first? Certainly, probably so. Are they going to make mistakes at first? Certainly, probably so. But if we'll train and teach them in the direction they need to go, the mistakes that they make won't be critical. They won't be a death knell to anything that's done, but they'll prepare them to lead the way after you and I are done. It's invaluable for us to learn that our mission in life as Christians is to do everything that we can, that we find to do with all our might. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with all thy might when it comes to working for God and laboring for God, and allow ourselves in that course of action to be used up, burn up, consumed by time as it takes its toll. Because we're all going to simply fade away. We're all going to simply pass. And we're all at some point in some time, the only memory that'll be of us will be if somebody goes to a cemetery somewhere and reads our name written on a headstone. And it'll soon come to be that even those that knew us will be there beside us, and there'll be none to remember our name. But if we prepare others to take our place, as Joshua was prepared by Moses to lead the children of Israel, when the time was right, it was Joshua who brought the children of Israel into the nation of Israel and subdued the land. He prepared Joshua. His own rebellion and frustration hindered him going into the promised land. And the Lord spake unto Moses that selfsame day, saying, Get thee up into this mountain, Abiram, unto Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, that is over against Jericho. And behold, the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel for possession, and die in the mount whither thou goest to, and be gathered unto thy people, as Aaron thy brother died in Mount Hor, and was gathered unto his people, because you trespassed against me among the children of Israel. His greatness was seen in that God buried him there in Mount Nebo. And to this day, none know the place of his grave. And the Bible says in Deuteronomy chapter 34, and verses 5 through 8, So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord, and he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab over against Beth Peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, so the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. It's amazing what God can do with those that are willing to be used up in his purpose. Those that are willing to give themselves to be used up in his kingdom. Those that are willing to give themselves to be used up for his glory and his honor. And in the great scheme of things, when the end of the day is done, isn't that all that really matters anyhow? Does it matter what else we've accomplished in this life? If we've been financially well off, if we've been successful in politics, if we've been popular in society, if we have a name of greatness that people recognize, does it really matter in the end of the day? If we're not a Christian, what difference does it make? Because everything we've done for naught. We need to instill in our children a certain sense of pride about physical things. I believe that's true. We need to teach them to be good citizens. I believe we need to teach them to have a good name. I believe we need to teach them a good work ethic. I believe we need to prepare them the best way that we can so that they'll have an opportunity to enjoy a good career. But we need to do all those things so that everything that they do, they can in turn be what God needs them to be. And everything that they do ends up being for the glory of God. That's how we need to be remembered. And that's what we need to be known for, and that's what we need to be recognized for. The only reason that you and I need to be popular in this world that surrounds us is so that we can have an opportunity to influence more and more people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. The only reason that you and I have a need to be financially well off, to be rich, is not so that we might enrich our own lives. It's okay if they are enriched, but in the process we might enrich the lives of those around us and take that wealth that we have and use it for the glory of God and His kingdom. That's what matters. Nothing else matters when the day of this life is done, because once it's all done, all we're all going to be is dust. Somewhere, someplace, somehow. We'll stand before Him. We need to be ready. If you'd have a need tonight in any way to respond to the invitation, you can come now. While together we stand and we sing for our courage.